Hi, I'm Ivo, and today I want to talk about Basemeshes and how to use them and when to use them and mainly why not to use them all that much. Because the internet now is full of websites and other stuff where people share Basemeshes, me included, and it makes work a lot easier, especially our professional work, because we get a head start with the thing we want to create. But the downside is that we are not really thinking about all the primary forms all that much anymore. And when you are learning, and we are all learning every day because this is a life pursuit of getting to know the anatomy of creatures, animals, and humans, human characters better and better every day. That's a really hard thing when you have like a base mesh like this every time, where all the main stuff, the the planar shape from the chest going nicely into the collarbone and the neck. You don't really have to think about that stuff anymore. It's already there, and you can just polish it up a bit and work with the angles you got, and you then, yeah, you basically know they are correct because they are from a scan. um, and it makes it really easy to skip the fundamentals in terms of creating a correct looking character, especially for humanoid characters. So if you want to learn all the forms and shapes really well, it's very important that you start from a base, if you're using a base mesh, from a base mesh that is very simple and not as defined as this one. So then it's wise, if you don't want to cheat, because I call it cheating basically, or taking the shortcut, to start with something like this. It isn't defined that much. You still have to figure out the cheekbones and the eyelids and all that primary form stuff and secondary forms. Um, so that's the plus side of things. You start learning. The downside is you have to do a bit more work. And the other plus side of it is, and that's the major thing, especially when you're concepting and wanting to create something original, is that you're not locked into something that's already there. And that makes it way easier to just stray away from what is here, because this is just ugly. But you have a basic shape for the nose, so you use that, but there's no defined nasal labial fold or anything like that. So that's something you figure out again and again, and that's also what makes the stuff look original every time, because you're figuring it out when you're going and you're searching for these shapes, instead of thinking like, oh, what's there is already looking good, I will focus on that other part. So that's a very important thing when you're creating especially your personal work. In professional work, we do use these base meshes. It saves a lot of time, but still, if you want to improve your skills, it's very important to start from scratch, or from something that it isn't that well defined. So you keep being creative, and you're keep searching and learning for better ways to make the forms and anatomy choices to make the model look as good as it can. So for instance, a long time ago, I started a creature. And what I did here is just, as mentioned before, I started off with Dynamesh, just pulling stuff around with snake hook. And that's the cool thing about ZBrush also. You have Dynamesh, and you could just pull stuff around and have a have a go at it, and get some really cool shapes in there without being locked in terms of polygon flow or what have you. So this wouldn't be possible with that human base mesh. You know, you would have the fingers and the feet and all the ears, and this character doesn't have it. So it's really important when concepting stuff like this to start something with something that is very undefined. So what I did here is just start from a sphere and turn it into a Dynamesh and just start sculpting and searching for forms and yeah, getting something nice out of it by shaping it and then well, this looks like crap, but yeah, continue searching for nice forms until you have something that you find interesting, and you can continue on, and you can get happy accidents like this as well, because you aren't locked into a base mesh. It really forces you to search for interesting forms. So for instance, here you have like the hip bones, and I really wanted to have some other silhouette going on here, so I chose to let them pop out, for instance, and pop out the shoulder blades and the knee and all that stuff. And trying that stuff out is a lot easier when you have something in front of you that isn't a base mesh yet. It's just a ball of clay, basically. It gives you all the freedom to push and pull stuff around, and that's a very valuable thing when you're just doing your own stuff and learning, and also if you need to create a creative new art, and want to make something really different. So yeah, eventually it ended up being something like this. Just can I have the shader of the eyes there? Yeah, and this is when it was symmetrical still, and I just Z-remeshed it. It wasn't going to be animated, so Z-remeshing gives it a pretty okay mesh to UV map later on, and create a nice concept model out of it. So here I pose the model, and you see, you know, later on I wanted to add these nails on the back of his arm, and here the nail as well, sort of a finger, and that's all no problem where you're not locked into a mesh you started with. Also, you don't then get the feeling like, oh, I threw away something that I already had, you know, because when you have a base mesh like this and it already has the UVs, it's very inviting to just think like, oh, I'm not gonna create some big spikes on his shoulder or some tentacles on his arm or something like that, because then I need to make a new mesh and new UVs, you know. So if you already are in the mindset like, okay, I'm going to create a new mesh and I'm going to create some new UVs, it opens up a lot more possibilities and gives you a lot more freedom in the end. But when you use a base model, especially in professional work, whenever you can, try to use some sort of base mesh, as long as it's not in the way of the creative end result. But for instance, this is a character I did a long time ago and never really finished, but this one was started off from scratch as well. So yeah, these are all the meshes. It was just a concept model, so a big ogre kind of dude. So yeah, this was Dynamesh in the beginning, and in the end I created a base mesh for it because I had big plans for it, and that's something you will probably have with your own projects as well. So you will you will end up with a lot of meshes that are pretty good, you know. So in terms of a base mesh, this is pretty solid. I made all the proper loops, gave it nice UV maps, and what you can do then is use this later on in a professional project, for instance, if someone wants a character like this, or if you're just having a slow day and just want to create something quick with something you already had, and you're not really focusing on, oh, I want to get better at a specific form in face and body, but just want to play around with different big shapes to get something interesting, then it's a very valid point to use something you already have if it's close to something that you want to create. And here I have an example as well. For instance, I concepted a stylized bear a long time ago, and that's something I didn't finish. I really didn't feel much for doing all the fur and stuff, but I had already retopoed it, so I made a nice base mesh of it. And then still, it's not a throwaway thing, you know, you can use it later on. So what I did then is like use it in other concept work, because this is, you know, it's not a human, it's an animal, so it's very inviting to use this for creature stuff. So what I created with this is this character. So this is way different, but it's the same base mesh, and yeah, then it already has all the loops going on there. And what I basically knew when I was starting with this base mesh is like, okay, I want to create a character with this kind of posture, so the big arms and the chest muscle moving over his chest downward like a dog and a bear has on them, and having a big neck and having that animal-like stance, but still being a kind of humanoid looking character when they are standing up. So yeah, it was really cool to use that base mesh and create something entirely different, and that saved some time during that process. So that makes it really nice for an evening of sculpting and creating something pretty fast that already has a poly flow to it, so you can just start look dev pretty easily. So you can start texturing and rendering that stuff sooner than when you start from scratch from Dynamesh. So to sum things up is start from scratch as much as possible, because it really makes you think of all the primary and secondary forms. So for instance, this zombie, I started it from scratch as well, just Dynamesh and sculpting the face and the body. And yeah, in ZBrush it's really easy to just use Snakehook to pull arms out, or just use the curve multi-tool brush. That doesn't work on this model because it has all the layers, but well, the mesh has layers. But yeah, it's very easy to add stuff to it, you know. So here, oh, that could be an arm and an arm there, and you can just keep extending that. So that's what I did with that model as well. And where is it? Yeah, here. And because a lot of stuff is asymmetrical and it's really pretty different from a standard face. I've bitten off some parts of the ear, and I just wanted to play with some forms and striations here and there, not being too concerned about the real underlying anatomy, because it isn't correct by a long stretch, but I just wanted to have something that is interesting. And if I would have used my human base mesh, it would have been a lot harder to get to this cartoonish style. So that's also a reason why it's very good to start from nothing instead of a predefined base mesh, because it gives you more room and yeah, and doesn't lock you into stuff that's already there basically. Um, but there are some exceptions, as I mentioned. So in professional work, it's a very valid reason to use base meshes as much as possible. And one other reason I would use base meshes in my private work is when I would already really know what I wanted to create. So for instance, I just wanted to create a female character. Started off with this here, but basically what I did, because there are some really good base meshes around and make it way too easy in my opinion, because then you get a lot of stuff for free, and yeah, you don't learn that much from it then. So what I did is I started from this, and I smoothed it a bit so it looked pretty crappy, something like this, just has a nice polyflow. And yeah, started sculpting, doing some proportions, and just subdivide it up and keep creating the forms from there. Now I destroyed some stuff. Yeah, so that's a valid reason in my opinion to really use these base meshes when they're very basic, but get some of the basic proportions there when you already really know what you're going to create. But when you're pretty much a beginner, I would advise starting off with a sphere basically, and really think about, okay, how is the skull formed, how wide is it at the back, how narrow is it at the front, and how is the silhouette, for instance. So the skull widens up at the top, and how is that all constructed, and where does the brow come in. That's all valuable stuff. And for instance, that the ear is always angled to the back. And when you're using a base mesh like this, most of the time, if you did it or someone else did it, this is a base mesh from someone else, they already had that in there, you know, so you're not really thinking about it anymore, you're taking it for granted. So yeah, try to do as much stuff from scratch, in my opinion, as possible, especially when you're struggling with creating the basic forms of the face, and you're really still figuring out where all the planes of the face are, because that's the stuff you still get for free a little bit, you know. So the angle of the top lip going into the lip and the lower lip, and how the nose is curved, how the nose is curved into the nose bridge and the forehead. All that kind of stuff can be already in there. So yeah, try to stay away from base meshes as much as you can basically when you're really starting off. And when you're feeling more comfortable and just want to bash out some models really quickly, or you need to do it from work, then just get base meshes wherever you can, and use them as well as you can. So for me, I try to save a lot of weird base meshes. So if someone has some stuff like I did, created a bear base mesh, I would certainly save that stuff and use it whenever I can. So for instance, the dog base mesh that is inside of ZBrush can be very helpful as well. It already has a layout, and it gives a quadruped character. So that can be a very handy tool when you need to make quick concepts. But for the rest, I would say try to create stuff from scratch and stay creative, and just use your creativity and just don't have the feeling, yeah, and make sure, and that makes sure that you don't have the feeling that you're locked into something that is really predefined. Um, if you're really having a hard time with this, or you are really a pro base mesh user, that could be, then there's another cool way to use it is, for instance, if you have this base mesh that I already have on my Gumroad and stuff as well, it could be really valuable to try stuff out. So when you want to be creative with that, is use the I'll have to bake this, and use the Basemeshes to Basemeshes, using the layers to create ideas for concepts. So what I would do then is when I need to make stuff quickly and I already know it's going to be a humanoid character, and it isn't going to diversify that much from what it already is, it's really good to make some layers and give it some name that's easy for you to recognize, and you can just drag stuff around and make the character wider or thinner, do whatever you think you need to do in some specific layers. So that was the shoulders and the head a bit. I'm just doing some weird stuff, and maybe he has a bigger belly, and maybe his hands are bigger. And what you then can do is just use the sliders in the layer system to see if you're going into a right direction or not. So maybe you like this kind of stuff, and maybe you just want to go away from that shape altogether, so really want to change it up. And what you could do then is just drag stuff down with the snake hook or whatever you want, basically. And let's get the dynamic off so I can change the size of my brush. But you could do some extreme stuff like this. Just doing some weird things. But yeah, maybe you like this stuff. Oh, way too far. Everything's too far. But yeah, maybe you just want to do some interesting things. Wow, that looks great. Well, just like the client ordered, something that looks crazy. No, but yeah, then you can just play around with it and just add in some of that stuff. And yeah, tweak it around, and then you can get to some other cool ideas and bake that. And maybe this is some new version, or getting you in a more different direction than you would when you would just do everything pushing and pulling without using layers. So I would strongly suggest using layers to build some new design, and use the sliders to push and pull stuff in and out, and dial it in more and more to get a new creative idea going. Yeah, so that's basically it. Use Basemeshes in production most of the time. If it's feasible, and in your personal work, try to create stuff from scratch, and make sure you learn as much as you can with creating all these basic forms. And if you use Basemeshes, try to get ones that aren't too detailed, and if they are very detailed, then just smooth some stuff out before you begin and try figuring out the forms. And if you do that, if you live by that kind of code, you will improve your skills a lot more than the people that are not doing it. Because if you are just using all the stuff that is out there and just taking it all for granted, you will fall flat on your face when someone needs something different that is not out there, and you need something from scratch. Then you just have to be capable of creating it out of thin air just with a sphere and start cranking it out. So I hope you enjoyed this video and learned some stuff. I'm planning to make some other interesting videos in terms of sculpting, creating characters. This was kind of the first, so sorry for all the misspoken words and all that stuff. But I hope you enjoyed, and see you guys around. Leave a comment and let me know what you think. And yeah, see you next time. Bye.